Okay, Rabbi, welcome to the Bottom Line Marketing Group, Tuf Shin Pei Gimel Chanukah Masiva. First of all, a very special thank you really to everyone here, everyone who day in and day out gives of their all in order to service our clients, many which are in Klei Kodesh. As we stress many times at the Monday meeting, it's a very, very big schus. Like we service Dirshu, there are people out there that have finished Shas because of our work. They are learning Shulchan Aruch, learning Mishnah Berurah, or a variety, or contributing to Kupat Rameh Balanes because of our work. And Reb Miller has a whole share in it, number 70, that if we have that in mind, then after 120 we have some real goodies waiting for us, as opposed to just doing it for Parnasa. Special thanks to Moshe Chaim for spearheading the BLMG 30. By the way, there was a very cute clip on Chanukah. My relationship to Rav Krohn goes back to 1987. I was the editor of a newspaper in Philadelphia, and Rav David Trang Zatzal had invited Rabbi Krohn, I believe he's also a relative, and came, and that was when the first Maggid book came out. And Rabbi Krohn was so gracious and took me, I just, hi, I do a newspaper, it was still a warm embrace. And we hit it off, and then we went to visit Rav Shalom together. I had pictures, and we went to your brother on Avenue M. And Rav Krohn was the moil of all my sons. It was a very special schus. One of them was a close call, but Baruch Hashem.
Not the bris.
Not the bris. The bris was the timing was a close call. But so number one, Rav Krohn put out, I think this is book number 14, as far as
18 actually.
18. But in terms of the Maggid series, it's number 8. It's 10. It was amazing. So I want to treat everyone here with an autographed copy to Bez Hashem. The last time Rav Krohn was here was amazing, an auspicious time. I mean, it was 3-4 days before the world shut down with Corona. And Baruch Hashem, everyone came back and more vibrant than ever. And I felt it would be a great schus for us to have Rabbi Krohn, who's such a dear friend for 35 years, come, address, share some words of chizuk for the work we do day in and day out.
Thank you.
It really is such a great thrill for me to be here. As Rabbi Yitzchak mentioned, we go back quite a few years, and I remember when he was a little boy, a teenager at that time, and he had an idea of writing a newspaper, and I, who always enjoyed writing, always would love to encourage people to write and to continue and be successful in it. And that's why I helped him as much as I did, even at that time, to give any interviews. Not that I thought that we were, giving an interview to the Wall Street Journal or to the New York Times, but still a young man who really had a focus. And I will never forget when he started his advertising business, and I would come down to his mother's basement, and I could never forget the love and the concern that your mother had for you to be sure that you would be successful. And then I always wanted to see Yitzchak succeed, and I believe I got you your first connection with ArtScroll, right? And through Reb Meir Zlotowitz, Zechron Levracha, and look at this office and look what Rabbi Yitzchak and all of you have done. It's a personal nachas to me to see that somebody who was determined and focused and was able, Baruch Hashem, with Siyata Dishmaya, to be tremendously successful. So to come here once again is as a personal joy and a nachas. But I want to share with you a very important thought, that there is a mafayrish. It was called the Meiri. Now, anybody who learned in yeshiva would know the Meiri. The Meiri was the original ArtScroll. Long before ArtScroll, when in the time of Rashi, in the time of the Rambam, in those Rishonim, the Meiri would write, and he would walk a person through the Mishnah and walk a person through the Gemara. And every single Gemara that I ever learned, every Masechta, the first sefer I bought was the Meiri, because he would walk you through it. So in his introduction to Shas, so you could imagine, he wrote on the entire Shas, and the introduction, you could imagine, is very important. It's funny, introduction is at the beginning of the book, but that's what a person writes at the end of the book. In other words, after he's finished, he writes the introduction, because he wants to give you the focus of what you should be thinking as you're reading the work. And he says something so amazing. He says that every incident or every experience that you go through, you have to grow from it. I once saw a beautiful expression, don't just go through it, grow through it. And that is so important. And he writes very sharply, if somebody goes through sukkahs, just sitting in the sukkah, and he does the mitzvahs, and he goes through Pesach, sitting at the Seder, or Chanukah, benching licht, and he doesn't change because of the experience, he didn't grow through it, then he says, Chas v'shalom, a person's like a donkey. A donkey carries wheat in the wheat season, oats in the oat season, barley in the barley season, and it remains the same simple donkey. So every person has to grow, especially from a simcha or chas v'shalom, otherwise, and especially a yontif. So the question is, we come through Chanukah, Tavshin Pei Gimel 2022, how are we going to be different at the end of Chanukah than at the beginning? So what I think is so important is to try to look at some of the things that we talk about on Chanukah and see how we can learn a lesson and apply it to our lives. So I'll tell you one of the things that to me, talks to me, and I believe would talk to all of us. You know, there's a machlokes, an argument in the Gemara, how many candles you're supposed to light the first night. Beis Shammai actually says you're supposed to light 8, because the miracle was for 8 days, and then 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But Beis Hillel says, no, we start with 1, and we go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But what I love is the language that the Gemara uses when it discusses what Beis Hillel says. And the language that the Gemara uses and says like this, the reason that we paskin like Beis Hillel is because he holds Moisif v'Hoilech. Moisif means that you add and you continue going. And that is such a strong message to me in life. A Yid can never remain at his status quo. No matter what you've accomplished, you got to go higher. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. Many, many years ago, I became very close with a great Talmud Chacham from England. And I first met him in my neighborhood in Queens, but then he spoke at our Aguda convention, Dayan Ehrentreu, and he just passed away a few weeks ago. I was in his house in London numerous times. He brought me in to be a scholar in residence, and we went to a place called Bournemouth, where Rav Segel used to go for vacation. His whole shul was there. And we always relived that thought that he once said at an Aguda convention. He was brought in from England, so you can imagine, the guest speaker Saturday night, and this is what he said. He said that when Yaakov gave birth to Yosef, Yaakov and Rachel gave birth to Yosef, Yaakov said something very interesting to Lavan. He said, Shalcheni, now you can send me ve'elcha el makom, now I can face the world. So the Shemesh Shmuel, the second Sochachava Rebbe, asked this question, and that's what Rav Ehrentreu said. Why dafka by Yosef? I mean, this was already the 10th child that he had. He had Yehuda, all the Jewish kings were going to come from Yehuda. He had Yisachar, all the Talmidei Chachamim were going to come from Yisachar. What's so special about Yosef? And he said, it's in the name. Yosef means more. And as soon as Yaakov realized that he had a child that would never be satisfied with the status quo, always tried to steig and go higher and higher, that's the one that I can face the world with. And that's the lesson that we have to take from this gathering today. Every one of us has to think, where in our Torah or Tefillah or Chesed can we be better at the end of Chanukah than we were at the beginning? I want to tell you 2 stories that both are in the new book. But the first one is a short one. The second one is just the most incredible. I made it the first story in the book because it's amazing. But let me tell you the shorter one first. I have a dear friend, his name is Rabbi Fall Mendowitz, who has a boys' camp. It's a travel camp. It's called Morabu. And it's based on the pasuk Morabu Masecha Hashem. How great are your workings and your doings and your creations, Hashem. So what he does is he takes kids from the East Coast, from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, from yeshiva boys, and he takes them out west to the Grand Canyon, Bryce National Park in Utah, Yellowstone National Park. We don't have that kind of stuff. We have Yankee Stadium and Shea Stadium or whatever, Citi Field. That's what we love. But out there, it's different. You see God's creations. And these kids are fascinated. And he's got this camp for 20 years, every year, new kids. He called me at the end of this summer, and he said, I must tell you something that happened in camp. I've had this camp 20 years. No kid ever said this to me before. He said, we were in camp already for 6 days, every night in a different lodge, and sometimes we would have a tent, and we would be out in the field. And one night, a kid comes in, and he's got tears in his eyes. And I said to him, is everything okay? Rabbi Mendelowitz said to the boy. He said, I'm a little sad. So he said, are you homesick? Listen to what the kid said. He said, Rebbe, it's 6 days we're in this camp. I haven't kissed a mezuzah once. You see, they were in Goyish lodges, in hotels. And when they're camping out in the field, in a tent, there's no mezuzah. So imagine the sensitivity of a boy who feels he didn't kiss a mezuzah. And he was so touched by that. And you know something? I think that that's something that we could all improve in. When we go, I'm not telling you to be like a seminary girl, every woman you walk into, kiss and as you walk in and walk out. You don't have to do that, right? But when you walk into the house, you walk out of your house, you walk into a shul, out of a shul, into a business that has a mezuzah. You come in, you come out. You know what says on the outside of the mezuzah? The shin. You know what the shin stands for? It stands for two things. One, everybody knows. The second one, not everybody realizes. The first one is Shakai, Shin Dalad Yud. That's God's name. But you know what Shakai, Shin Dalad Yud stands for? Shomer Dal Sais Yisrael. Hashem protects the doors of Klal Yisrael. Who's protecting this building? God is protecting this building. Who's protecting your home? It's God. And that's at the outside. When you walk in, kiss the mezuzah, touch the mezuzah and kiss it. You walk in, you walk out. And maybe that's something of Moisef Ahayla, something that we can do that maybe we haven't been so careful about. Here's something else. And listen to this story. This is so amazing. This story happened in Eretz Yisrael about 2 years ago. There's a family, very, very tight, close-knit family, a father and a mother and 7 kids. They live in Har Nof. And every year they go on a vacation. And every year they're so organized. They have an itinerary. They tell the kids where they're going to go. And they tell them, don't ask in the middle of vacation, we should go someplace else, because this is what we could afford. And no restaurants, no eateries, because in the summer they're very expensive. Mommy's making all the lunches and snacks, and that's what we'll do. And that year they were going to go up north from Har Nof to Tveria. They were going to go jeeping in Tveria and have a boat ride on the Kinneret. And that was fine. So the first day, they travel up north to Netanya. Netanya is gorgeous. It's on the sea, on the water. They take picnic tables, that are so many there, and they eat the lunch, that they got from the mother. She brought it out. And all the kids are having a great time. And then the father says, okay, we got a long trip to Tveria. Everybody get in the car. 7-year-old Zevi says, I can't. Why not? He says, Abba, you said it's a long trip. I got to use the bathroom. I got to use the facilities. And the father's looking around. There's only picnic tables here. Where's he going to get a bathroom? And then he sees a block away, he sees a restaurant. Now he knows no restaurant likes when you come in and you just use the facilities and you're not buying anything. But what has he got to do? He's got no choice. He goes into the restaurant with his son. Everybody else is waiting in the car. And the waitress greets him at the door. She says, can I help you? And he says, I feel so terrible. We're not really here to buy anything, but we have a long trip to Tveria. My son has to use the facilities. Do you mind if he uses the bathroom for a moment? She looks around the whole restaurant. She says, okay, make it quick. Fine. The kid goes to the back. He does what he has to do. He's coming out. He's in the middle of the restaurant. His father meets him, and they're about to walk out when the Israeli waiter, with a raging temper, Rafi, sees them. And he says, who gave you permission to come in here? Oh, you religious Jews, you're all the same. You take advantage, you don't buy anything, and you're coming in here, and who gave you permission? And this father is watching. That waitress is on the side. She's seeing this. And this guy is so angry. And she knows that if this father says that she was the one who let him in, she's going to get fired. And she's just shaking. She doesn't know what's going to happen. And the father realizes what's happening. And in a second, listen to what he thinks of. He says, excuse me, sir, you're yelling for no reason. So what do you mean? He says, we're all coming in to eat. Who told you we're not coming in to eat here? He says, who's coming in? I said, my family. Well, what do you mean your family? He said, we got 7 kids and 2 adults. He said, oh, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Just set the tables. Well, this guy's humiliated. And this little boy goes and says to his mother and the kids, Abba wants us to come inside. She said, I don't believe you. We never go to a restaurant. She said, Abba wants all of us to come in. They all come in, they set 2 tables. These kids never saw food like that. They never saw prices like that. They never saw a menu like that. And the mother said, everybody could have 1 drink and 1 dish. Fine. When they finish and they're about to leave, or, get the bill and then leave, they notice that by the kitchen, there's a lot of activity. 6 waiters are standing with ice cream in one hand and cake and sparklers in the other hand, and they're marching towards the table. The father stands up and says, excuse me, sir, there's a mistake here. We didn't order any dessert. And the owner of the restaurant comes over to him and says, young man, I want to tell you something. You see, when you guys sat down, that waitress came into the kitchen and she was crying. I said to her, why are you crying? She said, I just saw something. Nobody ever did this for me. They didn't come in here to eat. But when that father saw that I was going to get in trouble because I let them in, he called all his children and his wife. He's spending a fortune just so that I shouldn't get in trouble. I shouldn't get embarrassed. So when we heard that and she couldn't stop crying, we decided for special people, we got to do something special. That's why we brought you the ice cream. Fine. The kids finished the ice cream and the cake and everything. And the father says, I'd like to have a bill. So the waiter brings him a bill, and on the bill it says, the next time you come, 50% off. Anytime you come from now on. He says, no, but I want to pay for today. So the owner comes over to him and he says, in this restaurant we have a policy. We only charge people. We don't charge malachim. We don't charge angels. And that's Moisef HaHilach. Moisef HaHilach means doing more. This guy was ready to spend a fortune, which he did, just to save that waitress. And that's how we have to think. We have to think, if we learn a certain amount every day, we have to learn a little bit more. If we say a certain amount of Tillim every day, we should say a little bit more. Chanukah is a time for Moisef HaHilach. If you never said Karbonis in the morning, now's the time. And I'm going to tell you something. I know I'm on tape, but I'll tell you. A couple of years ago, when I thought about this idea of Moisef HaHilach, there were certain parts in davening that I didn't always say in Karbonis. And I wrote in my siddur, you could look at it, MV, Moisef HaHilach. And I started saying, the Karbonis every morning. Now, Karbonis is the Avodah. I'm not telling everybody to start saying Karbonis, but it's a wonderful thing to do. But you got to undertake something. Now, there's another thing also that I think in a workforce, when you're dealing not only with Jewish people, sometimes non-Jewish people, some people that are less religious than you are, there's something that we have to remember that we say in Hallel. Yehi Shem Hashem Movoirach Meyata V'Yadelam. God's name should be blessed. That means every single one of us represents not only bottom line, and not only Jews in Brooklyn, but Jews all over the world. Because no matter where you go, with a snood, without a snood, big yarmulke, little yarmulke, no hat, with a hat, baseball cap backwards, frontwards, they know you're a Jew. You can't hide it. So when you're on the highway, or you're on the plane, or you're in the grocery store, you represent all of Judaism, everyone. So we have to be so cognizant of everything that we do and everything that we say. I don't have to tell you, we've all seen these videos on planes when somebody says something and it goes viral, and within 10 minutes, it's either a Kiddush Hashem or a Chil Hashem for hundreds of millions of people around the world. So I want to tell you 2 great stories about Kiddush Hashem. I remember there was a wonderful woman that passed away just two and a half years ago, Rebbetzin Sheila Feinstein. I don't know if you had the schus to know her. What a special person, Rab Reuven's wife. Rab Moshe Feinstein had the highest regard for this daughter-in-law, Sheila Feinstein. So when she passed away, I went to Bir Menachem Ovel, and I was sitting with the family in Rab Reuven's big basement, and I said to the daughter, could you tell me one special story about your mother? And she said, I'll tell you. She said, here in Staten Island, there's an elementary school. And one day, one of the Rebbeim, the third grade Rebbe, he was rushing. He woke up late. And he was rushing to school because he knew the kids had to daven. He had to be there by 8:30. That's when the kids were going to start davening. But he was driving too fast. And he tried to stop at a red light. There was a very fancy car ahead of him. And unfortunately, he banged into the car. So, of course, the lady came out. In a second, he saw she wasn't Jewish. She was wearing a crucifix. He knew that she wasn't Jewish. And he said to her, look, ma'am, please don't call the police. Don't call the insurance companies. I'll pay for it. It's my fault. I'm a rabbi. I was rushing. I was trying to get the kids to pray on time. And it's my fault. Just take it to a body shop. Take the car to a body shop. I'll pay for it, whatever it is. And they get into a whole discussion. And after the whole discussion, she says, okay, I'll do that. 3 days later, she calls him back. She had a very fancy car. And she says, you know what the price was from the body shop. And it was very exorbitant. So he says to her, look, ma'am, I just want to ask you for a favor. If you don't want to do it, I'll understand. But I just want to ask you. See, I have a friend here in Staten Island. His name is Mendy. He's got a body shop. So if you don't mind, if you could take your car to his place, only if you're satisfied with the work that he does. Check out the other cars that he's fixed. If you're satisfied, then let him give you an estimate on your car. I think it's going to be much more reasonable. They get into a conversation. She says, okay, I'll do it. A couple of days later, she calls him back. She says, you know, Mendy does beautiful work. And you're right, his estimate was much lower. So I'm ready to go there. You're going to pay him? Yeah, I'll pay him. He knows me, I'll pay him. Fine. A few days later, Mendy calls this Rebbe. And he says, you know, I'm going to give her back the car on Friday. And I always get paid in full. Are you going to be able to pay me this Friday when I give her the car? He says, yeah, I think so. After he gets the call from Mendy, he calls the lady. And he says, ma'am, I just want to ask you a favor. If you don't want to do it, I understand. But, you know, I told you I'm a rabbi. We don't make that much money, you know, teachers' salaries. And he wants to be paid. Is there any way that you would be willing to pay him the full amount? And over the next year, every first of the month, I'll send you a check. And in a year, I'll pay everything that I owe you. Again, they get into a conversation. And she says, I'll do it. Every first of the month, he sent her a check. On the 12th month, he calls her up. He says, ma'am, today the last check is due. Can I come and pay you personally? I really would like to talk to you. She says, yeah, of course. He comes into the house and he says, ma'am, I got to ask you something. Before the accident, you and I never saw each other. We didn't know each other. You were so kind to me from the beginning. You didn't call the police. You didn't call the insurance company. You went to Mendy's. You paid the bill in advance for a year. Why were you so kind to me? Listen to what she said. You could cry. She said, I work in the public school system. Sheila Feinstein is my principal. As soon as I knew you were from her tribe, I knew I could trust you. Imagine that. As soon as she knew that this fellow was from Sheila Feinstein's tribe, that's a Kiddush Hashem. Who knows if she even asked Sheila Feinstein and told her the incident. But Sheila Feinstein was a walking, talking Kiddush Shem Shemayim. Now, I'll tell you another story. You won't believe this. And this happened January 2nd, 2022. Why is it so important, January 2nd? Because you remember what happened January 1st, 2022? That was the Siyum HaShas. 95,000 people in Giant Stadium, MetLife Stadium. We were all freezing, right? And they had the Siyum HaShas. The next morning, January 2nd, there's a fellow, Benjamin Ginsberg, who was a principal for many years in Minneapolis. Now he lives in Toms River. He had to go give a shiur in Borough Park. He had to speak to teachers and students. And he was rushing because he was late. So he's driving on the Garden State Parkway, weaving in and out of traffic, speeding, and a cop stops him. He's so embarrassed, okay? Pulls down the window. The first words out of the cop was, did you study your page today? He says, excuse me, officer, what did you just say? He says, I was working in Giant Stadium yesterday. Don't you guys study your page? Did you study your page? Benjamin Ginsberg told me, he said, I looked at my watch. I said to the officer, it's only 10:30 in the morning. I didn't get a chance to study it, but I will. So the officer says, if you promise me that you'll study the page, I won't give you a summons. He said, I promise. And then listen to what the guy said to him. He said, I want to tell you what happened at MetLife Stadium yesterday. One of my fellow officers said to me, I wish I was Jewish. I said to him, why do you want to be Jewish? I said, do you ever see a nation like this? What are they celebrating? Nobody won a lottery. They're celebrating that they learned the page and they understood it. 95,000 people singing and dancing, not one of them was drunk. Imagine that. And then he said this. Another officer said to me, that's what this officer is telling Rabbi Ginsburg. He said they made a big mistake yesterday. They called it Giant Stadium. It was really a stadium of giants. That's what we could be. We could all be giants. We could all be malachim. We could be Meisef HaHilech. We have to go beyond the regular parameters of doing Torah, Tefillah, and Chesed. We have to go beyond. And if you go beyond, that's the lesson of Chanukah. So I just want to tell you one more thing. And, you know, I saw the dreidel, oh, it was up there before. Okay, whenever. But if you could remember this or write it down, this is so magnificent to say over. It's a little involved, but then at the end you'll see something, you'll need your seatbelt, mamish. But the Bnei Yissaschar tells us that the dreidel is the history of Klal Yisrael. Now listen to this. There are 4 letters, Nun, Gimel, Shin, and Hey, right? He says, you know what the Nun really stands for? The word nefesh means soul. And when a Jew brought a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash, the Torah tells us, nefesh ki sakriv. A soul wants to get close. What is a carbon? A carbon doesn't mean sacrifice. Carbon means korov. You want to get close. But when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, we couldn't get close to Hashem. We couldn't bring the carbon. So the nun, our nefesh was hurt and destroyed in a sense. Gimel, the next one was guf, the body. Haman wanted to kill every Jew, even if they would convert. It didn't matter. He wanted to kill the body of the Jews. So Nun is nefesh, Gimel is guf, and Shin is seichel, the mindset. The Yavanim, the Greeks, they wanted to change our culture, not Torah. No, science, math, literature. That's important. So you had the nefesh, you had the guf, you have seichel. And then he says, you know what hay is? HaKoil, everything. Because today we have everything. You have Hamas trying to kill the guf of Klal Yisrael. They're trying to kill every Jew. Nefesh, we don't have the Beis HaMikdash. We can't get close as we would want. And then the Seichel. Take a look at all the thoughts and ideas and philosophies in America today. They're trying to warp our minds of what's holy and what's not holy. But then he says something brilliant. No dreidel can spin forever. Every dreidel's going to fall. And when the Nun Gimel Shin Hey falls, you know how much Nun Gimel Shin Hey equals? 358. There's another word that's equal 358, Mashiach. He says when that 358 falls, there's another 358 that rises. That's Mashiach. Now listen to this, you have to hold on to your seatbelts. Only Chacham Ovadia Yosef could have thought of this. He says, you know what Mashiach stands for? Get ready. Madlikin Shemoinas Yemei Chanukah. That's Mashiach. Madlikin Shemoinas Yemei Chanukah. Mashiach could still come this Chanukah. How's he going to come? See that? All those Golosin, they could fall. That Mashiach could rise, but it's only going to happen if we're Meisef HaHilech. If we add and never stop and never remain satisfied with what we've accomplished. This office under Yitzchak and all the other wonderful people here have accomplished so many things. I mean, as you said with Dirshu, I saw it firsthand. If you remember, I went to France and I was in England and Amsterdam and all with David Hofstadter's okay and sponsoring it. It's great stuff all over the world. So I'll tell you something very interesting. My sister-in-law, Kalman's wife, Naomi, when she was Naomi Rottenberg before she married my brother, she was the private secretary of Moshe Shera. Now maybe you're going to adopt this. You know what? When Moshe Shera, in the days of fax machines, you know what? When he would call in Naomi to do a fax, he said, could you fax something for Klal Yisrael? He didn't say fax it for me. He said, fax it for Klal Yisrael. Because the Agudah is Klal Yisrael. Bottom line is Klal Yisrael. When you're faxing and you're making designs and you're making brochures, that's Klal Yisrael. You're not just doing it for Yitzchak Saflis or his wife or his sons. You're doing it for Klal Yisrael. That's how Moshe Shera understood it. And that's how you have to all understand it. You should be so proud that Hashem allowed you to work in a place like this. Rabbi Sol Salanta was once at an inn overnight, and when he went to say goodbye to the owner of the inn, he said, "You know, I'm so jealous of you. You're able to do the mitzvah of Achnosas Orchim every single day." He said, "Rebbe, that's how I make a living." You know what Rabbi Sol Salanta said? Everybody has to make a living. But how many people are lucky enough to make a living where they can do a mitzvah? So of course, he has the mitzvah of Achnosas Orchim. And you have the mitzvah of building Klal Yisrael. That's what the bottom line is all about. Hashem should bless all of you. That as great as the things that you've done, it should be Meisef HaHailach, go higher and higher and higher. And hopefully then we'll be Zeicha to Mashiach in that holiday of Madlik Yeshemaynas Yemei Chanukah. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
And Shekayach, and of course everyone's going to be treated to an autographed copy
Of course.
Fromm's new magazine.